Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is going to be a little bit different. It's not a recipe, really, but it is a technique, although one that is admittedly a little bit rough around the edges. Normally, I like to have a pretty developed and precise technique ready for a video, but this was the only footage I had ready for this week, and I still think there's some interesting points to discuss, even with this preliminary trial technique. What you are seeing on camera right now is us cooking a small version of a porchetta roast. A traditional porchetta is basically the entire pork loin, not the tenderloin, but the regular loin section attached to the adjacent pork belly. And then this entire thing is rolled up with some sort of filling or a light kind of marinade mixture between the belly and the loin. The main issue with this style of pork roast is that, generally speaking, by the time the belly is nice and tender on the exterior of the roast, the loin rolled up inside it can be very dry and aggressively overcooked. Even if you took a very simple sort of modernist approach, pork belly can get tender at somewhat lower temperatures, but that takes a long time, and that would still leave the pork loin overcooked and mushy. Now, traditionally, it's just slow roasted, and the fact that the inside might be a little dry just doesn't matter because you're slicing it thin. The belly is still very rich, and you're serving it on a sandwich with Italian salsa verde. Another obvious solution could be to simply separate these two types of meat, cook them separately, and just serve them together. The YouTube channel Two Guys and a Cooler also had an interesting solution where they remove the pork loin but replace it with a section of pork neck so that the entire roast takes more heat to become tender, but it has a similar shape. My ideal solution kept the original structure and form factor, but still got both types of protein to a fairly ideal texture. So what you have been seeing is that we essentially shallow fried just the belly. Because even though the pork belly is wrapped around the loin, it doesn't really make it completely around. So there's almost basically two sides to the circular shape. There's the belly side and the loin side. Now, because of the circular shape, we did have to sort of adjust it into one of three different positions, but it's relatively easy to make sure that belly is submerged in the oil, but the loin is not really experiencing any heat. And we are really watching the temperature on that oil. This is really somewhere between like a French confit and a shallow fry. The oil was usually anywhere between 90 Celsius and 120 Celsius. My target for the pork belly section was 85 Celsius internal, and we actually hit 90 in certain spots in just over 3 hours, I believe. Now, once that belly had reached that high temperature, it was time to start cooking the loin, and I wanted to do this as a full steam oven sous vide setup, but that ended up taking too long. For anybody without much specialized equipment, you could definitely treat cooking the pork loin more like a reverse sear, where you have a standard oven set relatively low and you're shooting for your ideal target temperature. We ended up doing that, but finishing it on the grill for a bit more expediency. However, even though we did end up rushing things a little bit, we were still able to pull the entire roast once the loin section had reached a much milder internal temperature, around 58 Celsius. But the belly, again, was already fully cooked and tender. I think a version of this technique really has a lot of legs. So here's things I hope to improve in a future iteration. I would actually try brining the entire porchetta roast. Again, probably not the full traditional version, but a small section like this one. I wouldn't roll it up initially with any sort of stuffing on the inside. I would do the initial shallow frying with the belly unraveled so it didn't need to be moved around, and I would keep that oil temperature pretty close to 120 Celsius for expediency. Then, after the belly was cooked, I would add whatever sort of marinade or herb mixture, roll it up, and then cook the loin either sous vide in the Anova or as a reverse sear style in a low temperature standard oven. And then obviously at the very end, use a grill or broiler to get the skin crispy. But even with all of those potential improvements, I was actually really happy with this first attempt. Both pieces of protein were a really good texture. If you have any questions about this technique, please let me know in the comments, and also consider sharing and subscribing. Otherwise, thank you for watching.